Hello, welcome to the football show with myself as ever, Declan, Bogue, and Conleith Gilligan has joined us this week as well, former Derry footballer, football analyst, doing some games with BBC, I believe, enjoying doing that, Conleith. And what did you make of Derry last weekend? Your own Derry losing out to Donegal. They were brilliant for so long in the game, but like a lot of us, were you pulling your hair out when they wouldn't just shoot at the end?
It's a strange one because normally referees do give you that last chance, but to be fair to the referee, was right. You can't let the game go on like that. And probably, maybe players didn't really know how long was left, and maybe didn't know it was the last play. So, and in the heat of that, it'd be very unfair on players to judge them on that. But look, probably throw the ball in and have a go. But as closer to the game came, I didn't think Derry would just have been as close, but they were absolutely brilliant for long periods. And the game really came down to the fact that Derry couldn't take any of their 5 or 6 goal chances. Any of them goes in, and Derry probably win that game and leave with Donegal with a lot more questions after last year's Cavan game.
Declan, what did you make of it? Because we haven't spoken since.
Well, I mean, that is the analysis. That it really is summed up what Conleith says. Like, you Benny Heron, tapping the ball onto the crossbar, Ed bouncing so close to over the line. Shane McGuigan had a glorious chance towards the end just to tap it over and couldn't get it. Now, I'm a little bit disappointed that he couldn't just swing the right at it. I mean, he wasn't that far away that he couldn't have just used the right, but instead he had to use the left when he was facing, his body shape was facing that he was always going to kick a wide anyway. At the end, you could ask, well, why didn't XYZ take that shot on? And note Joe Bradley said in his piece today about Conor Glass, that it was just a little bit unfair, to ask a man in his first season back, to take on that responsibility. And most players would feel that, no matter what, a referee's going to give you a chance that unless it goes out over the end line, that is the way of it. It is rare enough. I remember back as far as 2009, Conleith, you remember this, when Tyrone and Cork were playing an All-Ireland semi-final and Davy Hart was on the attack with the ball, and I forget who the referee was, blew it up just in the middle of a play, and Mickey Hart at the time was absolutely furious, and it was a big kind of hullabaloo about that, is how can this ball be blown up in the middle of a play? I think there was a rule change in 2010 then, or
there was, right?
2010, that had to go out of play. So I can recall being in a National League game involving Kerry and Tyrone, where the final play just kept going on and on. And I think a Kerry player had an opportunity to clear, where they should have just done the rugby thing of sticking the ball into the stand, and they didn't. They kicked it out the field, and Tyrone came down the field, lobbed a high ball, and Colm Kavanagh got his hand to it and pushed it to the back of the net with about 2 minutes overplayed from where it should have been. But in general, Derry would have an awful lot to be happy with, the idea of apportioning blame to anyone in that Derry setup right now after where they've come from is frankly ludicrous. They've done an awful lot of work. They've shown up how Donegal can be got at in around the back. All you need, Padraig Cassie for me was probably the unsung hero of it, because he was just so brave. He just wanted the ball all the time. And I felt that even though he might have been even tiring, he still made the runs on beyond. He had set up Benny Hearn for his opportunity, scored one himself, and he kept sort of creating that thing where he was getting past the marker and creating chances. But, you have to look at the final scores in that game. Murphy scores a free, Ryan McHugh wins the free, or McNeilis wins a free, McBrearty puts it over, McNeilis wins the kick out for the final score off Sean Patton's kick out, and fair enough, it was recycled back and forward to the other side, but it was McNeilis laying off to McBrearty. And sometimes just the big game experience, you just can't buy it. Derry don't have it, and Derry are going on the right road. What encourages me about Derry is everything I'm hearing about is the clubs are so behind what they're doing right now. There's a unity of purpose, and that these players will be there for the next number of years. I could see Rory Gallagher. I know that, you see, before Donegal 3 years, Fermanagh 2 years, I could see him maybe saying to himself, this is my job now for the next 6-7 years, and doing a Kieran McGeeney on it. And that's all depending on results, of course. Maybe sometimes Armagh felt that they weren't actually getting the results for the time invested. But patience is everything. And no fans being in the stadium makes a big difference too, because like some players, some managers just have to listen to dogs abuse. Now that you don't really get that, so I mean, why wouldn't you be back the next year? Like, because you didn't have to listen to it.
Yeah, Conleith, I was doing a video with Stephen Poacher after it, and he was talking about just some of the things that he was impressed with what Derry did. Like, Derry dropped off on every single occasion, defended from the 65. He was saying that the matchup of Chrissy McCaig and Paddy McBrearty, the job that Brendan Rodgers managed when he only came back from injury, where Sean Patton had to kick under pressure and put a few out over the sideline. Like, are you seeing big progression? Like, just in Rory Gallagher's short time there.
Yeah, I think there's been massive progression. It's been a perfect storm very much for Rory, because he took over a Derry team, and they're at an age now where over the last couple of years, Gareth McKinless, Kieran McFall, players like that spent summers in America. Obviously, with the pandemic, that hasn't happened. So the players haven't been travelling. He's got Conor Glass back. So everything has worked perfectly for him. Then they had the good run in Division 3. They win a cup, and suddenly there's no issue. In previous years, to be fair, and Declan's right, league games had started and players that were on the fringes.
Just dropping there, is he? I think Conleith's just dropped there for a second. Hopefully he'll get back on there for a second. Well, even your thoughts on that, Declan? Do you think what Conleith's saying, perfect storm?
Yeah, and like, I mean, a lockdown happening, and that gives a team an opportunity to do some serious amount of stuff away from the pitch. I mean, that's all important too. And like Rory Gallagher, when he was there with Fermanagh, he got he had Nicholas Walsh that sort of drew up a physical program, and Leon, say for example, Leon Carter was there working in S&C as one of the kind of backup staff. But Fermanagh were clever in that they retained Leon, and he rolled out then whatever Nicholas Walsh had laid out for him. So Rory's got huge contacts in that area, and I think that when lockdown happened, I heard a yarn that Rory visited all the Derry players and sort of inspected their home gym setup to see if it was up to scratch for what they wanted to do. So if you've got that level of expertise, and then you've got that supervision, that level of detail that Rory Gallagher brings, that he's willing to actually go out there and visit every one of them, have a chat, see what they're doing, see can they actually do all these exercises, well then that's a huge jump. And people talk about having a tough pre-season and doing the weights. No, there was no better opportunity for any team to develop physically. I actually think you've seen it a wee bit across the board. Cavan turned up for business last year, and they were completely injury-free, in better shape than they've ever been, and they won a championship in the depths of winter. And I think for Rory Gallagher, the way it has gone is he's got them up to that level physically, and then when they came back in, then they're able to do, right, okay, now we can work on strategy, and also what doesn't get talked about so much, but just building the sense of, right, what are we about? What is this group about? Like, what is our way? And all those kind of things that sound woolly maybe to some people, but when you're in a team, these things have to be figured out and they have to be nailed down.
Yeah, do you want to take up that point again, Conleith, before you just got cut off?
Sorry, I got cut off there. No, look, Declan's absolutely right. Derry did hit the ground running. The amount of work that has been done, they brought in Peter Hughes, and some of the players have been raving about him, and he's been going out and visiting players, meeting them, doing extra sessions there, and that all leads into all the contacts that Rory have. Enda Muldoon lives now in Magherafelt. He'd have been meeting the players for coffee. Like, there's stuff that's going on that probably hadn't been on under previous regimes, and I think the fact as well that those Derry players that he has now, physically they're incredible shape. Right across that half back line, they're generally all midfielders. Derry's versatility. You talk to Padraig Cassidy. He's a midfielder, and the one thing that he has is incredible legs. He can break tackles all over the place. Gareth McKinless has been a revelation. Has a 2 or 3 years out. He's had a couple of injuries at club. He's been spent a couple of years, in America and things. He's back now, and physically, I've never seen him in better shape. So the work that they've done. But to go back to the reason probably why Donegal got over the line, they're able to bring Murphy, McNeilish off the bench. Derry didn't have that type of player to bring off, and they were expecting McKinless and Cassidy to keep driving at Donegal, 65, 70 minutes, and Derry just probably run out of gas a wee bit. But that Derry team, that bench will get stronger. And the thing is now, Derry's coming off the back of, you know, a really good under-18 team that are going to an All-Ireland final this week. They have 2 or 3 pretty decent under-20s, and they'll all be desperate to play for Derry now, because Division 2 this year will be very tasty. Like, all them big fixtures, you know, it's as good as Division 1 would have been a year or two ago. So I think everything that Gallagher's been fit to do has led us to this point. But the fact now that they've got that wee bit of success in the league, they've had a really good go with Donegal, he'll be able to ask for sort of more resources, more preparation time, and when there's success, he'll get it. And as long as he gets that, he'll keep building. The danger is always that with McGuinney having a bad year, you know, they had to show real faith in him to give him the next year and the next year. And Armagh is where they're at now because of the continuity in management, the continuity of players. There's been no in and out policy of, you know, a new manager comes in and he picks his own players and he drops 5 or 6 players who the county have invested in physically through the conditioning, through the nutrition. And that's gone, that's wasted. So I think if you look at any successful team at the minute, in any sport, probably anywhere in the world, the one thing they have is a real continuity in terms of their management and their backroom team and their ethos.
For that reason, Conleith, do you think that Kieran McGuinney, after 7 or 8 years being in the job, that he needs to make this Ulster final when they play our Monaghan this weekend?
I think it does. A lot of people have sort of made the point that Armagh need to take out a big team. It doesn't matter who they play. They need to get to an Ulster final. And then after that, they have the type of players that are more than happy in them settings. But the Monaghan's coming. It's a good time probably for Armagh. Donegal and Tyrone would pose a different threat. But I think Monaghan's coming. And still not really sure. They've brought loads of players through. They're probably not as reliant on McManus as they had been in previous years. The 2 or 3 under-20s they've brought in have been a breath of fresh air. You know, McCarn, in and out, looks brilliant. McCarthy, on a one-off game, can shoot the lights out. The question will be, will Monaghan have enough to do that against Armagh, who haven't looked particularly brilliant at the back? They conceded 14 points against Antrim, which is probably too much for a game that they were very dominant in. But I think Armagh, I think it's their time. I think their age profile, the amount of time they've had together, I just have a feeling that this could be Armagh's time to make a breakthrough.
And you see, and I'll get off this, like we'll not talk about Derry again after this, but just when you say about, you know, the nutrition and strength conditions, so on, one of the things that would have had, you know, conversations with different managers, and some people might say, well, you know, Armagh, they only had one or 2 games in those championships. Beat Derry, they beat Derry last year. They won a game before that. And you know, the record wasn't looking clever in Ulster. But managers in Ulster would have said to me that they admired hugely what Kieran McGuinney was actually doing, because apart from Jamie Clark, who's always liable to do his own thing anyway, nobody was dropping off the panel. They were all there. They were all developing. And I'll take someone like a Greg McCabe or a Stephen Sheridan. These come from less fashionable clubs in Armagh. And when they were in Division 3 playing for Monaghan, I remember a couple of league finals and that, they weren't getting their game, and now they're starters, or they're, you know, I mean, Stephen Sheridan was injured for the last few days, when he come back into it. But like, you know, you have these players who have just had the patience and have stuck at it. And we asked, that was asked of Kieran McGuinney after the Antrim game, and he was talking about the players who don't listen to the noise. And that obviously deserves a follow-up question. What's the noise like? And he said the noise is when you're, say, player for Forkhill or whatever unfashionable club, and you're not playing the league games, and they need you, and they might be struggling for points, and somebody in the club, you're probably in your club gear watching a club game that you can't play in. And can you imagine how many times someone in the crowd is going to come up to you and say, what are you doing? Like, you know, McGuinney doesn't fancy you. Come and play at your club. At least you'll be playing football. Do you not want to play football? You're a footballer. What are you doing sitting on the bench and just being training ground fodder? And so you have to admire McGuinney, because whatever way he's invested in them emotionally and whatever bond they have there, at least they have it.
And and you're right. And that's what Derry, that's the problem Derry have had over a number of years, in that fringe players did leave the panels on previous managers. And again, it was no fault of the managers. But again, where there's promotion and relegation, and you have a team, you know, and you take the likes of, you know, Shane O'Neill's, you know, and Greg McCabe, or, you know, Jamar Hall and Forkhill. Like, any time they're trying to get a promotion, Crossmaglen will be fine without their players. But for them other clubs, you're right. Greenmore, need those players. And Derry have been in a situation this year. There's been no promotion or relegation, so no club has put any player under pressure, and that helps. But again, just to go back to the Armagh thing, and I know that Blaine Hughes will be down away from training days with Kieran McGeeney, with Kieran McKeever, with Dennis Hollywood, doing one-to-one kicking. Defenders will be meeting groups of 2 and 3 away from training days. The amount of work that goes in is absolutely incredible, and they're getting the rewards of that now. And unfortunately, unless you win a cup, a lot of that stuff goes unnoticed, because nobody can really tell a story about how many hours they put in if they don't have a cup to show for it. Whoever wins the war always writes the history, and that, unfortunately, is the way the GAA will be. And given the fact that so many teams now in the league are a level par, there's still only 3 or 4 teams are going to win the All-Ireland. But Armagh's now put themselves in a position where, realistically, what Cavan done last year is they showed that it can be done if you can get it right on the day. What they done to Donegal was a template, and Derry followed that in, and Armagh will be looking at it. And this is probably it's been their best opportunity, obviously under McGeeney, but it's probably been their best opportunity in a decade to get into a final, and a final with Donegal or Tyrone not really going brilliantly, not really sure of themselves. If Armagh could navigate Monaghan, which will be tough, because the one thing for me in Monaghan is that every year you're looking at who's going to get relegation out of Division 1. And every year I have this feeling that I can't see Monaghan being saved this year. And yet, no team deserves more credit. They reinvent themselves. They change manager. McManus gets injured, Darren Hughes gets injured. Real key players. Vinnie Corey goes. But yet somebody steps in. And, the likes of, your Charles O'Connell, Stacey Awards, McAnespy, Mulligan that's come in. Really, really top-end footballers. And what Armagh have been able to do, they're coming from clubs that aren't the most fashionable. They're not all coming from Scotstown or Clontarf. And I think that's the sign of any county. If you can get your smaller clubs to give you 1 or 2 players, and Monaghan deserve huge credit for that. And I think Armagh Monaghan could be the game of the championship. They're just that close. They're that close. It could end up in a great game. And just in that, for me, when you look at last weekend's game, the match-up between Began and Blaine Hughes and kicking out, I think that's where the game will be hinged at. I just think it's one of them games, and I know the nerds don't really like looking at that, but kick-out stuff's fascinating whenever you can get into it.
Oh, sure, it decides games, and it actually feeds into a point that I wanted to make to you, Declan, which is, if you go back to last year when there was a bit of expectation on Armagh, and I did a piece with Stephen MacDonald, and he was talking about maybe trying to end the gap back to 2008 when they last won an Ulster title. But early on in that game against Donegal, they imploded. If I remember correctly, the kick-out imploded. So now we're talking about Armagh as if maybe they can start to take steps up the ladder and challenge for an Ulster title, and who knows, maybe beyond. Sometimes you look at them and think there's that in them. But the last time there was expectation, they got blown out of it by Donegal.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that game was that Armagh have big units. They've got Niall Grimney, who's played international rules. They've got Stephen Sheridan, he probably won't feature. The Jordan Burns, they've got the 2 O'Neills. Conor Mackin, he's a big guy. Armagh McKay's big guy. I'm trying to even struggle to think of Jamar Hall's a bit diminutive, but that's not what he's there for. But really, Armagh have very, very few small players. And, when you say that that's how it was all decided, Donegal just put the most enormous squeeze in them. I think it was the second quarter. And even just after the game, and this is even months after it, when Armagh people were talking about that result, Jim McCurry, who was the assistant manager at the time, just talked about the disaster second quarter they had. But I mean, you can't really complain. When it come first, second, third, or fourth quarter of the game, or when it came after water breaks, the fact is that Donegal went to town on them, and Armagh just had no kind of coping mechanism with that. Now, I can see, obviously, someone like Kieran Donaghy would come in and say, right, he's very much into scenarios. And that all comes from basketball players where they say, right, we're 3 points down and with 4 minutes left. How do we rescue the game in basketball? And, there are ways and means of slowing or quickening the game up and not wasting possession. So, yeah, I mean, somebody else said to me today that Tyrone had Donegal's kick-out figured out completely last year in the championship in Ballybofey. But I don't know if you remember, Sean Patton had a kick out to Patter Monaghan. Was it Monaghan?
Completely cleared midfield.
He passed the ball 90 yards. That's what he did. He had a kick pass that went about 90 yards. It bounced. And was it Monaghan that finished it, or Owen McHugh? By the way, it was the game's decisive play, and it was a goal. And that came straight from the kick out, which goes to show you, like, I've been impressed with Blaine Hughes this year because I've seen him a couple of times in the athletic grounds. Now, here's the weak kicker, though. How often has these teams played in Enniskillen? Will they find it a wee bit different? Enniskillen's probably a little bit more narrow than most pitches. So all that kind of comes into play. And I just wonder, has either team got an opportunity to get out onto that pitch this week?
Well, that game's in Newry, so I think.
Apologies, sorry.
That game's in Newry, so I think Newry would play very. It's all right, hey, Declan. I'll keep you right. You can buy the tea. You can buy the tea.
It's going live, so.
But you're absolutely right. And in the earlier league games, I've seen a fair bit of Armagh's football, and some of the earlier league games, they have had poor last quarters. You know, like they should have the Donegal game away, they should have the Tyrone game away, and it was their kickouts that did. And it's not Blaine Hughes' fault. There was a lack of movement. There was probably a lack of bravery at certain parts. But against Roscommon, whenever Roscommon put the big squeeze on the last quarter, Armagh were brilliant, and that kind of would make me think that they have worked it out. I think they have got better. But all across the games this weekend, you know, if you look at Donegal, Tyrone, you know, Patton and Morgan, you know, like all those games will hinge on kickouts. Like, as an interesting one, when I was looking at Monaghan, I'll go back to Coleraine played Scottstown in an Ulster Club semi-final a few years ago, and Coleraine give all through the Ulster Club, Beggin's kickouts had killed teams, had pushed up on him, he had knocked it over the top, and Monaghan had played, you know, a very, very good tactic of a man running out. Coleraine obviously had caught on to that. Sean Leo played a corner forward. Sean Leo McGoldrick went up for the kick out half. As soon as they allowed the cornerback to have it, they all retreated to the 65, and it was very, very difficult for Scottstown that day. And I'm sort of thinking, with the damage that Began does in his kick out, you know, would it be Armagh have pushed up really hard on all kickouts generally all year? They've done it in Roscommon to great effect. Is there a chance that Armagh will decide, no, you know what, we'll not give Monaghan a chance to hit us from midfield up with a kick out. We'll just wait on them. And that'll be the wee tactical game where I think Monaghan will push up hard in Armagh. But I wonder, will Armagh decide we'll get set up in defence and not take a chance? Because the teams that are getting caught all through the league, like you look at the times that Derry had pushed up on Donegal. Donegal caught them for a couple of points straight from a kick-outs from over midfield, where Derry didn't have any defensive structure in place at that time. So I wonder, is it a case this weekend that, you know, Armagh will be a wee bit more conservative in terms of how they push on kick-outs?
I'm sure if you want to take that one up, Declan.
Well, I mean, you know, as well as that, you get away from the tactical and you just look at the, you know, do a further examination of how the progression has been. And it's just a statistic that caught my eye this week was every other Ulster county have been in Ulster final since Armagh was last in one. You know, it's back in 2008. And at the time, like, given Armagh's standing in the game at the time, like, I mean, you know, even as late, I know that they were coming from 2000. They were really coming from 99 when they won that Ulster title. Then they're coming 2000, and the games against Kerry went to extra time. 2002 they won it. 2003 in the final. 2004 they're caught cold. They would see it against Fermanagh in a quarter final. 2005 was the games against Tyrone. 2006 was the epic against Kerry. 2008 then they won the Ulster title after a replay. Caught by Wexford, I think, in the quarter final. Yeah, so I mean, at that point, to think that Armagh would be nowhere near an Ulster final, and I mean nowhere near it, like, you know, given that how the results have gone in the decisive games. Okay, they brought Cavan to a replay. In 2019, they brought Cavan to the replay in Clonus. But my God, like, who'd have thought that the fall off the cliff would have been just so steep for them?
Isn't Brendan Donaghy the only one that has an Ulster medal? Yeah, and then even Aaron McKay was talking about this and trying to get to an Ulster final, and he was saying it's massive for us. When you're growing up, you're watching all the O'Rourke's and Ulster finals year in, year out. Probably Armagh fans took it for granted. They were in the final nearly every year. As a young fan watching, you were thinking it's great and this is always going to be happening. We haven't been in an Ulster final since 2008, and there's probably pressure building. Even before the Ulster Championship threw in, people were telling you that this was the easiest opportunity for Armagh to get to an Ulster final. A bit like England and the Euros. It was failure if Armagh didn't get to the final. Our own county men were saying that to ourselves. So just between that and even looking at how they played against Antrim, who were a Division 4 team, it's not like they made particularly easy work of them, and it was more so they pulled away in the second half to win 4-15 to 15 points. And then Monaghan, you were at that one, Declan, 121 to 14 points win over Fermanagh. What do you think of this kind of pressure stuff? Does it kind of weigh down heavily on a player, Conleith? Did you ever find that as a player that it does weigh on you and impedes your performance?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does weigh heavily on players. Like Armagh's big job going into the Antrim game was to stop players getting complacent, because everybody they would meet is, you're only playing Antrim. And it just seeps into the consciousness. And the thing about management and coaching is you've no idea a team's complacent until the game starts. And I think Armagh just probably got caught a wee bit early on. They probably didn't expect as much from Antrim. I thought Antrim tactically were very good for 20-25 minutes. But when you're playing sort of lower league teams, you're only holding back the water, and eventually the quality will shine through. I think in this game here, it's a real ding-dust battle. Monaghan will know Armagh inside out. You know, like Banty, they'll have their homework done. Armagh will know Monaghan equally as well. And I think there's pressure on both teams. You know, obviously Banty's coming in sort of new, second year. You know, he's got all the people around him he wants again. And he has to deliver something as well, because, you know, next year he'll be going for his third year. So he needs something to show for his. So I think it's a big game for both teams. Yes, probably Armagh are under a wee bit more pressure to get to that final. But in terms of the personnel, the one thing that sort of Armagh will be very good at is they'll have players insulated as best they can. You know, they'll make sure that there's not really much pressure on. And again, the thing about, if you look, and to go back to that, if you look at that Armagh team, you know, Andrew Mernon, 6 foot, you know, Campbell, Rory Grugan, these are players that all play around midfield for their clubs. So just to go back to that kick-out point, if Armagh can just go long often enough, I think they have a massive chance. Even they don't have anything special. They have enough players with enough height. And one thing about Jermaine Hall, he might be small, but he's very good on the breaking ball. And then after that, just to come back, it's matchups. Matchups will be the key for all them games, and who gets it right. And like, there's loads of big decisions, big calls there to be made.
Declan, you also wanted to talk about the matchup of the coaches. So Donny Buckley with Monaghan and Kieran Donaghy with Armagh and the influence they've had.
Yeah, because I'm sort of looking into this for the weekend, and I just see, have been speaking to people around the place, and Donaghy's thing, you know, is I mentioned before about scenarios, like, you know, and working your way through them and thinking your way through games. I remember Donaghy's book, he talked about the idea of that they're having a team meeting, and he said to Jack O'Connor, maybe we should look at some scenarios. And he says Jack reacted like as if he was standing on the curb and a double-decker bus just whizzed past him. He says his head just went like this here. And he says, I'll tell you about a scenario, Donaghy. You missed a shot from 20 yards today. Why is that for a scenario? But, like, you know, his background with basketball is you sort of are everyone that plays, because there's only 5 people on the court in your team, everyone sort of coaches each other through. And maybe there was a wee bit of that in Armagh before, where they weren't talking to each other enough. Like, I mean, I find that's a massive thing with teams. Like Donegal 2012, there were some of the biggest talkers that, you know, teams had seen. Conleith actually can tell us a wee bit about that, because like they had and
it wasn't always in a positive way, actually.
Well, I mean, they had fake names and all made up for tactics they were doing and all that. I'm not saying that's particularly new, but they were calling some players and referring to players as Paul, even though there was no outfield player called Paul. It's just Paul Durkin in the nets. But I think that it's critically important to have boys on the pitch that are talking through it. I could hear a good bit now. This is what happens when there's no fans about, really, in the stadiums. You can hear the talking, and you can definitely hear Armagh up that. Donny Buckley, what I'm hearing from Monaghan is pretty much what you'd expect, to be honest. He's taking boys aside, he's looking at what they're good at, and he's enhancing that. So if you're a good tackler, he will take you aside and he'll work on things like body shape, execution, how you get the hand in, how you get the hand out, where you make contact with the ball. He's really into the nitty-gritty of tackling. And also, like what I noticed about Monaghan against Fermanagh, and I thought this was brilliant, and excuses, sorry if I've said this before, was Conor Boyle was constantly coming forward from full back. Fermanagh had 2 sweepers, so Conor Boyle was heading straight for James McMahon, who's the vice captain, I think, and probably the experienced sweeper, leaving one sweeper free, who is Luke Flanagan, who's 19. And then when you're 19, you're not going to be worrying about, like, I'm going to start telling Declan McCusker where to be here in the pitch. You're just hoping that the game passes by without you doing anything majorly wrong. So they kind of took all that talking and the communication of Fermanagh defence out of that, but they bomb on forward, and it's something similar to what Kieran Whelan was pointing out with Donegal backs. If you look when the play has ended, all the sort of full back line are nearly right on top of the goalkeeper. And why is that? It's just to clear out the space. It's to clear out that space where they're defending along 45-metre line so that people can get the space to take the shot. So, look, this game has become, in Gaelic football in general, I don't think that a lot of teams are doing a huge amount different. I think that most teams now at the top end, especially in Division 1, are now more or less copying what Dublin do. Forwards high, forwards wide, everyone coming, runs made from the sidelines in towards the middle and trying to get that space for a shot off. And if it comes down to human error, somebody slips, you're in for a goal, then that happens. That's what happens when a Padraig Cassidy takes on his marker and gets in behind the defence and tries to palm it then across the goal for Benny Hurd. I think that a lot of these teams are all playing the same game, but then it comes down to just simple skills execution and your ability not to foul and your discipline.
Would you agree with that, Conleith?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Declan's absolutely spot on. Defensively, most teams are setting up. You're not marking the wings. You have a central channel that nobody gets in around. You get the bodies in there. If a player goes out to the wing, you let him go. You shadow him out there. But again, it comes back to the bit where who makes the mistake. And again, I think the weather this weekend is given to be really good and dry, so there'll not be a big pile of slippages. And players now at the top level of Division 1 have never been better. Like, you rarely see players dropping a ball under pressure. Players have never been better. But I think Declan hitting something really interesting. The case is, if when you look at different things, if McManus is injured, who hits the freeze? On the other side, Grugan, O'Neill have been very good. What's that? Grugan out of his 119 has scored 11 frees. Oisin O'Neill has scored 110 out of his 116 from place balls. So Armagh have had a bigger emphasis through the league on place balls compared to Monaghan. Monaghan have a bigger spread of scores because obviously McManus didn't play a big pile. So some of them other players have got exposure to hitting frees, but the difference will be massive. If you look at last weekend's game, Derry and Donegal, going into the game, 43% of all Derry's scores came from dead balls, where it was only 16% of Donegal's. So what does that tell you? It tells me that Division 1 teams don't foul, whereas Division 3 teams foul a lot more. And any time that you foul, and we'll blame Monaghan's a wee bit different, because most teams don't foul inside the 45. The percentage to score the shot ratio is very low. With begging about there, if there happens to be a breeze, you can't foul inside 65, because he will just take 3 steps and swing that leg, and generally, more often than not, he will put the ball over the bar. So in terms of free kickers, it'll be a really good game, because in O'Neill, he can kick them, Begging can kick them, will McManus kick any? And then the other bit, I suppose, is whether Aidan Falker will be free from injury and able to play. So if he's able to play, does he do a man marking job in full back, or do they play him in the full forward line? Really, really versatile. So they're the wee things in terms of the selections. And then it's a case of, in terms of whether Darren Hughes plays, will McManus play? I think he will. I think Hughes will play if he's anywhere close at all, because you can't really save these players in the hope that you'll get them for an Ulster final. The game's too finely balanced. If Aidan Falker is anywhere close, he will have to play, because he is Kieran McGeeney's lieutenant. He embodies everything that's good in Armagh. And in terms of him playing, he'll be a massive lift, because outside of that, Armagh have a very settled team. Like 12 of their 15 players have started the same games, and there are 5 players that have played every minute of every game. So Monaghan have.
Just to go with a prediction, then I'll start off with you, Declan.
Yeah, there's a little bit of way. I'm thinking in terms of Armagh's fade outs, and you look at the Tyrone game. Now, I don't have the numbers to hand, but I think that Armagh were forced into 4 changes before the half hour, and that was injuries to James Morgan, Aidan Farker, 2 other defenders. There was wing back in there. Apologies, but anyway, 4 defenders were gone before the half hour. That meant that Kieran McGinney could make a maximum of 1 more change because of the way you've got 5 windows to make the substitutions. Yes, you can make X amount, but you've only got 5 windows to do it. So to me, the Tyrone game, Armagh ran out of steam, but they ran out of steam because there was context behind it. Against Donegal, that was even more worrying though, because Armagh got a good lead up. They had the chance to close it out, but they didn't. And Donegal, just every time they attacked, Paddy McBurty was on fire, but they were still able to get it to Paddy McBurty with relative ease. There's a little bit of like what Antrim did there to keep the ball out of contact. Even if Antrim, people say, ran out of legs, there's a couple of big calls that went against Antrim. Like there was one point where Conor Murray was actually struck in the face, and Sean Herson gave the free the other way, and Armagh went down and scored the goal there, or a point there. And you can kind of chalk off the last 2 goals anyway, because it meant nothing. The game was kind of gone from them at that point. These things are not going to affect Monaghan. I just kind of see Monaghan squeezing through. 2-3 points to spare, having had a battle and having maybe been behind a couple of times. But I just think that Armagh are not used to beating the big teams. Like, they need a signature win, and they need that. But until they get it, we can't actually say that they can deliver that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Conleith, would you?
Yeah, well, everything Declan says is right as always. As usual, Declan's always right. But I'm going to go against him. I think it's Armagh's time. I think Armagh are just at a stage now where they're ready to push on. And he's right. They had to make the forced change against Rome, but Ross Finn came in at that time and suddenly has been a fixture now in the team. Like, would Kieran McGinney had the faith in Ross Finn had he not needed to use him? And now he's got the game time. So he strengthened his bench. Look, for me, I think Armagh will win it, providing Jamar Hall can do something in Carlo O'Connell, not to go mad bombing. Can James Morgan, if that is the case, keep McManus quiet without fouling him? They're the things. Who marks Ryan O'Neill? So I think if Armagh can get those key matchups right, I think they've enough either way. But the other caveat is they played a very long direct kicking game against Antrim, and it didn't work for long periods. Yes, they got the goal and they were unlucky one other time. But generally, you can give the ball to Division 3 and Division 4 teams like Antrim and not get punished. If Armagh go for that long kicking game again and they give Monaghan ball, not only will they not get the ball back for periods, but it'll always end up going dead at the other end, and it will usually be a score because no teams are shooting outside the prescribed scoring zone now, just like Dublin. So every time they give the ball away, there's going to be danger. If they can get enough possession, I think they'll have enough to win it, but it hinges on the matchups and whether Blaine Hughes can get the kickouts away, because even Armagh put the heavy press of a 4 and a 4 and a 3. Beggan is liable to kick beyond that and is liable to find the pockets more so than Armagh. But I just have a feeling, I haven't seen Armagh 3 or 4 times this year, they're going the right direction, and I just think it's their time, and I think they'll squeeze by. Could be extra time, could even go to penalties, but I think they'll just squeeze past.
Yeah, there's a feeling that some big championship game is going to go to penalties soon. Even the Mayo and the Galway under-20s did during the week. But to jump onto the other semi-final, which is actually in Enniskillen, Declan, you have a Donegal team that put up a big scoreline against Down, that narrowly saw off Derry, up against the Tyrone team that, after conceding 6 goals to Kerry, had a pretty good performance against Cavan, 118 to 13 points. But these two counties do not like each other.
God, there's so much spite in this rivalry. it's unreal, like, because I'm willing to say this, Conleith will back me up on it, like, coming from Fermanagh, there would have been a number of times that you watch your own county against Tyrone, and when they have the game done and dusted 10 minutes into the second half, like, the supporters have a habit of cheering every pass, like, and saying fairly salty things, like, to anybody, and they don't care. That's all part of the makeup, like, you know, and that kind of rubs counties up the wrong way. And Donegal, I think, I mean, you go back to 1972 was the first time that Donegal won the Ulster title. I was actually watching some of the footage in RTE there. It's sensational stuff, like, and so Donegal won that title. Brian McAnuff was the player manager. Following year, they go up to Ballybuffet, and Tyrone leather into them. Neely Gallagher, who played for Guido, he had to be brought to Letterkenny General Hospital for emergency surgery. He nearly lost his eye from a belt from a fella not too far from Conleith, actually. And then, like, you know, since that, you know, even Jim McGuinness's book there, I was looking back over it this morning, he was saying that he was playing an under-21 match, a challenge match against Tyrone in Castlederg, and you know, throughout the game they'd be pawing at you, talking to you, and at one stage he went in and the fullback, you know, he cleaned him out, but then he put his studs into his face and just put the ball of his foot and just wriggled it round just to really hurt him, you know. And he looked at the referee done nothing, the fullback just laughed. So with all that kind of hurt, then when McGuinness became manager, could do something about it, he absolutely leathered it into these Donegal players that they would not be made shows of, they would not get this kind of behaviour, they would not accept it. I mean, even in that first year in 2011, somebody's documented it in a book, and he was saying that, you know, they came with a strategy that the moment then that Donegal started getting on top, that the Tyrone boys would start mouthing and getting in their faces, and they had a saying, "Not today." So that was their way of distancing themselves from the emotion to the actual playing. So if somebody slabbered at you, somebody told you, or you just said, "Not today," not engaging, not going down your level, and Donegal beat them. Following year, Donegal beat them again, but, you know, Martin Penrose had a shot that Paul Durkin pushed onto the post with his toe. Year after that in the league, Niall Morgan hit 3 frees, long range. It was his first year in the league. Saved a penalty from Michael Murphy. Carl Lacey was spot on going down the tunnel. Then they went up to Ballybuffet later on, a couple of months later, and it was real welcome to hell stuff, like, you know. And Morgan, when he went to take his first free, he found Rory Kavanagh, Michael Murphy, Neil Gallagher, maybe one or two others standing in front of him, all with their arms in there. You could, like, if you think about the perspective there, and there's so many of those frees that Donegal players couldn't have been more than 8 yards in front of Niall Morgan. Niall Morgan simply couldn't have seen the posts. There's no way he could have actually lined up the kicks. And of course, like, those Donegal players were in his face. And this is what, you know, after that humiliation, if you want to call it that, that Tyrone got at the hands of Dublin in 2011, all of a sudden you're in the McGinleys, you know, Brian Deher, all those players had retired. The real hard chores, like, you know, and you were left with Conor Gormley, normally, you know, kind of fighting a losing battle by himself and maybe with Joe McMahon. But the players that were left were all too nice. You know, if that had happened in Tyrone in 03, 05, 08, they would have been straight into those boys every single time. They would have been straight onto the referee. They kind of let it happen to themselves. Morgan missed a series of frees that day, and Donegal squeezed home. And ever since that, it has been, even during that, and they played in 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's 9 times. Tyrone only won 3 of them. They won the Ulster final in 16, the semi-final in 17, and they won the Super 8s game by Buffet in 18. 19, Donegal won by 4 points. It could have been 10 points. Tyrone were a total mess then, and Donegal just won pure mental resilience last year. And they thrown under new management. They're under boys who are no shrinking violets. They will be sick at what happened to them. They have to be absolutely appalled with what happened to them in Killarney. And I think that there's going to be an awful lot of fire. There has to be an awful lot of fire in Brewster Park.
And Conleith, like, what was your thoughts of playing against some of those Tyrone teams and even those Donegal teams? And your thoughts on the spite between them, and if Tyrone, like, are Tyrone a soft touch now compared to before? They're not a soft touch, but like comparatively.
Well, in my time, it was, whenever you had, you Mark and Racy, Philly Jordan, Conor Gormley, they were proper hard players. Like, there was no Nahan Given and Donegal, Enid Deal McGee and Eamon, and you heard plenty of stuff, and there was a stage we played Donegal and Ballybuffet, and there's times I sort of wondered, was it actually true? They said it was such confidence. I'm wondering, was some of the stuff true? But no, proper hard footballers. And again, I think both sides are probably that wee bit softer than back in those days. But the one thing, Declan talked about all those victories. Any time that Donegal got those victories, they all had one thing in common: Michael Murphy. When Tyrone beat them, what happened? Michael Murphy got took out of the game. Be it Joe McMahon, Justy McMahon had running battles with him for a number of years, and there was always an outcry after.
I'm going to jump in, but because I remember this well, like in 2016, when they were in the Ulster final, it's one of them ones that Mickey Hart really did. You got to give him credit sometimes, like because he sometimes does completely the unexpected thing. And I'll just take you back to 2012. They played Kerry in the back door, and he started Ronan McNamee for his debut, and he made him mark Paul Galvin. Now, that did not end up well. But in 2016, if you looked at that defence, previously he had Conor Clark, had marked Michael Murphy in 2012 and did very well indeed on that day. Justin McMahon, Joe McMahon, you've Conor Gormley. Instead that day, he put Cal McCarn on him, and I think Cal McCarn scored a point. So he outscored Murphy from play in that game. So he definitely played that whole game. 2017, and you can take it from there anyway, Conleith.
Yeah, but look, all these games always hinges on Murphy, and like, there probably hasn't been a more influential player, in the last 20 years maybe than Murphy. He does everything. He scores, he nails his frees. But in terms of the hard stuff, he puts in the big hits. Whenever the game's going away, he finds a way of putting pressure on the referee and suddenly getting wee inches. And if you look at the game last week, when Murphy came on, I think I've seen a stat that Donegal outscored Derry 8 points to 4 from Murphy came on.
Yeah.
So that's where he is. Tyrone, I was with Aidan Dark, a couple of McGuffins from Aidan Dark over the weekend, and the debate started about McCurry, and they just rate him so highly, 12, 13 points week in and week out. And then some of the other boys were saying, but look, until he puts this big performance in against Donegal, Kerry in the championship, because they were comparing him in the same vein of form as Clifford and Conor O'Callaghan at the moment, and that's where he's at. If he can pull one of those performances out again, the difference with McCurry probably this year is that in the Hart era, they probably didn't have huge faith in him. He didn't get playing through the phases when it wasn't going well. So the minute he missed a free, or he maybe was taken off them, or was taken off, at the minute he's not going to be taken off. He's the main man. The interesting bit will be, he has been the leading light. If Tyrone come through and play McShane, and McShane plays at 14, does that minimise the effectiveness of McCurry? So I'm wondering, will they try and hold McShane back, because McCurry has been shooting the lights out? But the thing is, McCurry, McBurdy, who wins that battle? And whoever wins that battle goes a long way. If Murphy's still not 100% fit, which he can't be because he would have started against Derry had he been fit, will they bring him on as an impact man again? McBurdy's revelled in that, because if you think back to the down game, McBurdy was really struggling to get into it. As soon as Murphy went off, McBurdy got playing from the 14 on the edge of the square. They started kicking ball in as opposed to hand ball off, and McBurdy shot the lights out. So there's all them wee things at play. But this is massive for Tyrone. There was a clamour for change. They've got the change they want, that the vast majority of people and supporters wanted, but it has to deliver. Will McNamee get his card overturned? I think that's maybe for debate in the next night or so. It's tonight. They're all the wee things, and the only good thing that Tyrone have is they've got definitely great representation to try and get them off.
But like, can you how does that work? You surely, no doubt, like that, Fergal Logan is coordinating it, but he can't personally himself represent the Tyrone County Board. Is there not a conflict of interest there?
No, he'll not represent him. There'll be another person representing him at that. But look, obviously the fact that they've looked at... Sorry?
Who is it?
My source is just... I can't reveal my sources, but there will be somebody else representing him at that. We'll just leave it at that then. But it will be a case. The fact that they've sought a personal hearing means that they obviously feel they've got grounds. Now, looking at it live, there wasn't much in it. It was a handoff, but it was very stupid. The minute you raise your hand above neck height, you are putting yourself in a very dangerous position, because a linesman or an umpire sees a hand high, and the referee asks them what happened. You don't ask about severity. You basically ask, yeah, he put his hand in his face, and that's dangerous. But I think Donegal are probably better set up, but they have questions defensively to answer. They haven't been good. Like, Down had 3 goal chances against them in a game that they totally dominated. Tyrone, Cavan done really well for periods. Tyrone didn't look great. They improved as the game went on. But I just have a sneaky suspicion that, it could be Tyrone that could nip them. But they would need big performances from your McCurries. What about McKenna? Where does he fit in all this? He obviously wasn't togged out as he injured. I think Colin Kilpatrick came on. He's been really, really solid for the last 4 or 5 years in Tyrone, but didn't really fit into the previous Tyrone setup. He's 6'4", massively big athlete. All those things. I just think Tyrone probably no real evidence in it, but I just think it's their time to make the breakthrough again. I think they've everything that they need there, but they have to deliver for the management, or else they go into a second year and then the pressure really comes on.
Can I quickly take up that point you made about the red card for Ronan McNamee and why he got red? Like, the Cavan player didn't make a big deal out of it. It wasn't like he threw himself to the ground. But in the Tipperary-Kerry game, Michael Quinlan got a red card himself, and Gavin Crowley were kind of, the usual argy-bargy. And then Quinlan goes in for one last shove, and Crowley goes down as if he's been shot in the back. I felt he was exaggerating a little bit. I'm worried about simulation or red cards happening a little bit too quickly, because it's a physical game, and surely some of the best parts we ever see in football or hurling are just the physical parts. Yeah,
and it is, and simulation has been there for long and many a day, and that'll not change. The problem is now for teams, like, there was a time 10, 15 years ago, you went down to 14 men, you could still win the game. Not anymore. There's too many spaces and pitches. There's too much riding on it. A team goes down to 14 men, anything more than the final quarter, they're going to lose. I think fair play to the Cavan man. He put his hands up as if he was hitting the face. Like, McNamee had his chance once, and then he came at it again. Now, we don't know what was said before or anything like that, so it's very hard to judge. It was very mild. Other games that happens, he gets a yellow card. But in terms of the Quinlivan one, I think there has to be, if you're going to retrospectively look at incidents like that, the man that goes down holding his face, having not been hit, deserves to be punished for it. If the player gets his red card rescinded for having done nothing, well, then there has to be a punishment for the man who, simulated or was play acting. I think that has to be stamped out. It's not a nice part of the game. But in championship matches where the margins are so fine, and actually, like, for example, if you can get your defender on a yellow card early, he's getting taken off, and suddenly then you're into who's got the strongest team. So I think the margins are so fine. If you can get a player in a yellow card, obviously black cards coming through now is 10 minutes in the sin bin on a penalty. So referees have to be absolutely on it, and they have got it wrong over the last number of weeks on loads of big decisions. And because games, there was an 11-point spread, that probably didn't cost teams as much. But now, once we get into provincial semi-finals, provincial finals, and then the latter stages of the championship, these games are going to be won by 1 to 3 point spreads. Yellow cards, black cards, and red cards, and cheap frees will be the difference of winning and losing. And do referees need help? Absolutely need help. But until you define what a tackle is, it's going to be very hard to help them.
Yeah, Declan, I'm going to go with Donegal. Give you a final call on this game.
I think Donegal.
Yeah.
And that's just, like, I mean, as well as everything else, like, they just have more experience. Like, management have more experience here in making the big calls and take games. You've got Stephen Rochford there and Declan Bonner, and people talking about Declan Bonner being on the last legs or anything. Like, I mean, it's kind of ludicrous. Like, they've won 2 out of the last 3 Ulster championships. They've learned their lesson from Cavan. Okay, they didn't get it handy against Derry. but they have Megan Murphy coming back in, and even a half-fit Megan Murphy will still take 2 men out of it. But then it's all about thinking fast on your feet, and like no matter what way no matter what way we see it, until they are involved in a tight game, the Tyrone management have a lot to prove at this level.
Yeah, that's true. Just to even quickly go to the Leinster semi-finals, Kildare against Westmeath, but Dublin, I think Dublin are definitely the story. Eric Lowndes has left the panel now. There's fitness concerns over John Small, Johnny Cooper, Owen Merchant, Robbie McDade, Jack McCaffrey's not there, Paul Mannion, Kevin McManaman's with the Irish boxing team, and we still don't know the situation with Stephen Cluxton, who's been playing with Parnells. What do you make of this situation? Are Dublin vulnerable, Conleith?
Yeah, I think it's very un-Dublin-like. You know, a lot of their washing has been aired in public, which didn't happen. You know, you didn't hear what was going on, and that's never a good sign. The whole thing about Cluxton, I just find it very bizarre for somebody who likes the simple life. You know, nothing gave more column inches than the fact that he wasn't going to play, but he hadn't left the panel. So what's happening? Like, I assume Jim Gavin and the squad know exactly what's happening there. But it's very, very bizarre, and it's very unfair on Comerford or whoever else is going to be playing, because automatically the first ball they drop, there's going to be a clamour for him to come back. So either come back or stay. In terms of the Eric Lowndes and stuff, we go back to what's happening. Is he under pressure from his club? Is he not getting the game time he wants? I just think there's so many things that's un-Dublin-like. Somebody's going to beat them at some point. They're starting to creak a wee bit, but they have such riches that I still think it will be Kerry who maybe end that. I don't see it happening in Leinster.
Declan, then, from their point. Sorry, go ahead.
The only thing I think is they're not brought to a margin of 5 points in a game, you know, from here on, and then it is such a poor indictment on the level of coaching then and going on in Leinster. Like, I mean, Leinster Championship has been dead for well over a decade now. But, and I'm not saying the team in Leinster could take Dublin out, they can't. But my God, like, I mean, you know, there has to be a team that take them down the stretch a little bit, that there may be 1 or 2 points adrift for them going into the last water break. And that's, I mean, all we can hope for at this point, like, just to see a little bit of competitive nature. But it's going to be Kerry.
Sorry, Declan, sorry to interrupt you, but like, if you're going to play every game in Croke Park, you know, these teams that aren't playing regularly in Croke Park don't have a chance against Dublin, who know every inch of it. I think if Leinster is going to be competitive, you know, like, if Donegal play every week in Ballybuffet, you know, if this game of Tyrone and Donegal is in Ballybuffet, I go for Donegal, because they know every inch. It's a difficult ground to play on. Croke Park's a very difficult place to play in for Westmeath. You know, Meath are probably a bit more comfortable in it, but not to the degree of Dublin. You look at the Euros, England get to the final playing 6 or 7 matches in Wembley. Like, it is unfair. If you want a fair Leinster Championship, surely you have to try and get Dublin into other venues. Sorry, broaden your point.
No, that's true. I mean, you know, it's there was a stat there that they hadn't the 3 away games there, whatever way they fell, and that was all due to punishment for breaching COVID rules. Not like, but it was the first time it happened, like, in decades upon decades. It is unacceptable, but I mean, you know, there's an establishment there too in the GA that are willing to facilitate that. I mean, you know, the idea that they, I mean, I'll never ever get over the fact that when the Super 8s were conceived, that, you know, that Dublin's game in a neutral venue would be considered Croke Park. I mean, that was absolutely sick. Like, and, you know, Donegal, in fairness to them, and Mick McGrath, their chairman, brought that to the attention of the GA, tried to have a motion. Dublin, then their spokesperson, labelled it as a mean-spirited and divisive motion. I mean, that's pathetic. That was pathetic language for them. But it was also Dublin themselves should have the courage to say, you know what, that's not quite fair. Like, how can we get 2 out of 3 games in Croke Park and then play all your league games there? I mean, it's unacceptable. But I think that some county boards are so terrified of putting their head above the parapet, because they know that it mightn't work out well for them in terms of, like, where games are arranged and little side deals and little side hustles in the GA that go on all the time, that they're afraid to actually, you know, point out what is clearly, patently unfair. the arrangement of Dublin's fixtures is clearly patently. And Dublin fans despise you saying it. They absolutely hate you saying it because they think that you're taking away from the marvellous, wonderful group and good ambassadors and all the rest, all the fine things that the people connected with the Dublin football squad have been over the last decade. That's indisputable. It is indisputable. But it's a separate issue, and you cannot have a system that is weighed in their favour and stand up and tell everyone, well, they're the best team in it. Because
and Declan, just on that other point, sorry to go back to Dublin, Shane, but like the Connacht final and the Ulster final being in Croke Park, I think that gives both them teams a massive shot in the arm, whoever would come through and win that. So that when they do go down in the Croke Park, they've had another day, they've had experienced a win there, and it just makes them a wee bit more settled. And I think if that's going to be the case, I think I can understand why teams would want that.
Yeah, it's true. And even just back to the record of Croke Park, last year they beat Westmeath 22-11 when that was in Portlaoise, I think. This year at Wexford Park, they only beat Wexford by 15 points to 7. And then if you look at their Croke Park record last year, 223-7 against Laois, 321-9 points against Meath. I mean, I was in at that, and it was so grim. It was horrific to watch. And I just wonder, can we make any case for Meath winning this game? In his 5 years, Andy McEntee has now used 75 players and 9 different goalkeepers. So what does that tell you, Conleith?
It tells you there's obviously a lack of goalkeepers in Meath, or there's too many goalkeepers, one of the two. Look, and I think Meath, they're exciting. I think they're at a level in top end of Division 2, and that's where they're at. I think they're just below the real top 3 or 4 teams. But they have pace, they have power, they have physicality. And Declan's right. If they can't make a fist of this game, then the Leinster Championship looks like it's dead anyway. But they have to be able to show something that, for McEntee to come back another year and go at it again, they have to be able to say, look, we're making progress, we're going in the right direction. And anything other than getting into 5 or 6 points would be seen as abject failure as well for McEntee and Meath. And Leinster need a strong Meath, and if this game was in Navan, you'd be looking at it differently, because I know myself, not having played in Croke Park a huge amount of times, every time I went there was always a real excitement about playing there. It was amazing, but it was unsettling. Hitting frees was unsettling, and people would say, look at it and go, sure, it's just grass, it's just goalposts, but it's not. Everything's different about it. The distance, there's maybe 7 foot of grass from the sideline to where the grass finishes. And when you're kicking balls wide, Dublin know every expanse of that. Other teams coming up don't. Meath will be better prepared in Croke Park than other teams because they would play in it most years. But I just think that I just can't see where they're going to stop this Dublin juggernaut just yet.
Yeah, and Declan, if you take that up, and then maybe just quickly on Kildare Westmeath.
Yeah, look, it's just summed up with that. Until we actually see change in the relationship between Meath and Dublin, then there's nothing is going to change. Kildare Westmeath have the look of Westmeath over the last number of years. You could see, certainly in terms of players, how they're developing. But I think that the Kildare's need is greater here. Kildare would be, the investment even of having Jack O'Connor there, it has to pay off for them, and they've kind of always seen themselves as a step up from where they're stationed in life right now. So I mean, maybe it's time for a little bit of development or something to pay off there.
Yeah. So just to finish that off, then Kildare did get through against Offaly in the quarterfinal, 115-13. Westmeath battered Laois 320-110. So do you have a favourite for that other semi-final, Conleith?
Yeah, I think as Declan said, what Jack O'Connor has done there, they have done really well and they've been very competitive. But Westmeath has probably been one of the success stories. And it's not one of the sexy counties, but what they've been able to do and bring players through, and they have lost a lot of players over the last couple of years, but they keep that going. But I just think Kildare are at the stage now where they're trying to break back into that top tier again, and I think Kildare will just edge it. But that's not to take away from what Westmeath have done. I think they've been brilliant, and I suppose whenever I seen the Laois result last day out, I just thought, where are Laois at? because Westmeath absolutely battered them. But again, there's obviously good work going on in Westmeath. I don't know a huge amount about them, but in terms of the results, like, they have been very, very competitive now for the last number of years.
All right, well, I think that's it for the football show. My thanks to Conleith Gilligan, brilliant stuff, and Declan Bogue as ever. Thanks very much, lads.
Thanks, Shane. See you, Conleith.
Thanks, Shane.